My name is Sky Holland, and I'm 27 years old. 6 weeks ago, my parents sold my grandmother's antique grand piano, the one she promised would someday be mine, and used every dollar of the $65,000 to buy my sister a brand new Lexus RX. They assumed my grandmother was too sick at Silverline Hospice to ever find out. They assumed I was too quiet to say anything. They were wrong. When I finally told my grandmother what they had done, she didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply reached for her phone, dialed one number, and said 7 words that would unravel everything my parents thought they owned. Before I tell you what those 7 words were, and what happened next at my mother's 58th birthday party, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if this story truly resonates with you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, let me take you back to the day it all began. One Tuesday afternoon, my grandmother was admitted to a nursing home. I received a call from Dad, right after my piano lesson. Margaret's had another heart attack, my father said. No greeting, no concern. She's stable, but they're moving her to Silverline Hospice. Family meeting at the hospital in an hour. I immediately packed. By the time I arrived, my parents and my sister Lila were already gathered in a corner of the waiting room, their voices low and hurried. My father, Edward Holland, stood with his arms crossed. My mother, Meredith, clutched her designer purse like it was keeping her upright. And Lila, 2 years younger, always the favorite, was scrolling on her phone, barely glancing up. Good, you're here, my father said. We need to divide responsibilities. Not, how are you holding up? Not, this must be hard, just logistics. Someone needs to visit Mom daily, he continued. Your mother and I have the business to manage. Lila's in a critical phase with Ethan's family. Ethan Cole, Lila's boyfriend of 8 months, the son of my father's most important business partner. My father turned to me, the way someone assigns a chore they don't want. So Sky, you'll handle the visits. Your schedule is flexible. Teachers don't exactly work overtime. I wanted to say I taught music to 37 children every week, that I ran after-school programs, that my time mattered too, but I didn't. Of course, I said quietly. I want to be with her anyway. Perfect. He was already turning away. Keep us updated if anything changes. As I walked down the hallway toward my grandmother's room, I heard my mother's voice, low, meant only for Lila. At least she's useful for something. I kept walking. Not because I didn't hear her, but because I'd grown so used to this kind of pain that I'd stopped expecting anyone to notice it. My grandmother Margaret Holland's room smelled like lavender and old books. She insisted on both. They try to make everything smell like antiseptic, she told me on my first visit. I refuse. If I'm going to die, I'll die surrounded by things I love. And she was 78, sharp as a blade, and dying of congestive heart failure. The doctors gave her weeks, maybe a month or two if she was lucky. I visited every day after school. We talked about music, about her years performing in concert halls across the Northeast, about my students, kids who couldn't read notes yet, but already felt rhythm in their bones. One evening, she reached for my hand. Her grip was weaker than I remembered, but her eyes were still fierce. Sky, she said softly, I need you to know something. Anything, Grandma. The piano, she paused, letting the word hang in the air. My grand piano, the one from 1901. I knew it instantly. I'd learned my first scales on those keys when I was 7 years old. That piano had been the soundtrack of my childhood, the only place in our family where I ever felt truly seen. It's yours, she said firmly. I've already told Edward and Meredith. I told them last month, in front of everyone, that piano belongs to you. I remembered that moment clearly. My father's jaw tightening, my mother exchanging a look with Lila, my sister rolling her eyes, muttering something about sentimental junk. Grandma, you don't have to, I said. I want to. She squeezed my hand. You're the only one who understands what it means. Promise me you'll take care of it. I promise. She smiled then, a quiet, knowing smile, the kind that felt like it was holding secrets I didn't understand yet. There are things more valuable than money, child, she said softly. And some people need to learn that lesson the hard way. 2 weeks later, everything changed. My grandmother asked me to bring over some old photographs from the house, pictures from her performing days, moments she wanted to see one last time. I still had a key, so after school on a rainy Thursday afternoon, I drove over. The house was quiet, too quiet. I walked through the foyer, past the dining room, and into the living room where the piano had stood for nearly 30 years. The space was empty. I stopped breathing. Where the piano should have been, there was nothing but a faint rectangular outline in the carpet. A ghost of something that had lived there for decades, now gone, violently erased. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking, "where's Grandma's piano?" There was a pause. Then my mother's voice came through the line, casual, dismissive, like I was asking about a piece of old furniture. "Your father handled it," she said. "Adult matters, Sky. You don't need to worry about it. Handled it." "How?" I asked. "Where is it?" I said don't worry about it. Click. She hung up. I stood there in the empty living room for what felt like hours, staring at the pale outline pressed into the carpet. Rain tapped against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. That evening, I drove straight to my parents' house. My father, Edward, answered the door with a glass of scotch in his hand, irritation already written across his face. "The piano," I said. "What did you do?" He didn't even hesitate. "Sold it. Got $65,000 for it. Good price." The room tilted. "You sold it?" I said. "Grandma said it was mine." "Grandma's dying, Sky." He took a slow sip. "She doesn't need a piano, and neither do you." Behind him, I heard the jingle of car keys. Lila stepped into the hallway, smiling. "New keys, new car." "You bought her a car?" My voice came out flat. "With Grandma's piano?" My father shrugged like I'd asked about the weather. "A Lexus RX. Lila needs to make the right impression. Jonathan Cole's family is particular about appearances. That piano was supposed to be mine. And what would you do with it?" My mother, Meredith, appeared behind him, arms crossed. "You teach children's music classes. You don't perform. You don't have the space. Lila needed that money for her future." "Her future," I repeated, tasting the bitterness. Lila strolled into the foyer, swinging her keys like a trophy. "Don't be jealous, Sky. It's not a good look." She smiled, all teeth. "Maybe if you'd picked a better career, you could afford nice things too." I looked at my parents, at my sister, at the life they'd built where I was always the afterthought, always the one whose needs came last. "Does Grandma know?" I asked. Silence. "Does she know you sold her piano?" My mother's expression hardened. "She's in hospice. She's on morphine half the time. She doesn't need to know anything that might upset her." "You mean you don't want her to know?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping, sharp and cold. "If you tell her, and it stresses her out, and something happens, that will be on you. Do you want to be responsible for killing your grandmother?" The words hung in the air like poison. I should have backed down. The old me would have. But something inside me had shifted. Something had finally broken. "Grandma has a right to know what happened to her property," I said quietly. "And I won't lie to her." I turned and walked out before they could respond. I didn't sleep that night. My apartment felt smaller than usual, my modest one-bedroom, the place my parents always mocked as proof of my poor life choices. I sat on my second-hand couch, staring at a framed photograph on the bookshelf. My grandmother Margaret, frozen in time at her final concert 20 years ago. Her fingers hovered above the keys, her face calm and purposeful. That same piano, the one they had sold like it meant nothing. My mother's words kept circling in my head. "If something happens, that will be on you." Was she right? If I told my grandmother the truth, would the shock hurt her? Would I be adding pain to her final days? But then I remembered something she once told me years ago, when I was 12 and afraid to admit I'd failed a math test. "Truth can hurt," she said, "but lies always hurt more." They just take longer. I pulled my knees to my chest and thought about the last 27 years. Every time I stayed quiet to keep the peace. Every time I accepted less because pushing back felt pointless. Every time I made myself smaller so my family could feel bigger. And where had that gotten me? Here, alone, invisible, watching them erase my grandmother's wishes as if her words carried no weight at all. If I stayed silent now, I wasn't keeping the peace. I was becoming complicit. By 3 in the morning, I'd made my decision. My grandmother deserved the truth. She deserved to know that her son had taken from her, lied to her, and assumed she was too weak to matter anymore. And maybe, just maybe, I deserved to stop apologizing for existing. I set my alarm for early morning. I would go to Silverline Hospice before school. I would tell her everything. My grandmother was awake when I arrived, propped against her pillows, watching the sunrise spill through the window. "You look like you haven't slept," she said gently. "I haven't." I pulled a chair close to her bed and took her hand. "Grandma, I have to tell you something," I said. "And it's going to hurt." Her eyes, still sharp, still steady, searched my face. "Then tell me." So I did. I told her about the empty space in her living room, about the piano being gone, about the $65,000. And I didn't stop there. I told her everything. About the Lexus RX sitting in my sister's name, about my father's casual dismissal, about my mother's threat. I said it all, bracing myself for tears, for shock, for the kind of devastation that might shatter what little strength she had left. But my grandmother didn't cry. She let out a long, slow breath. Not a gasp of pain, not a sound of betrayal, just a sigh. The kind that comes from someone who has seen this moment coming. "Grandma," I whispered. She turned toward me, and her expression wasn't broken. It was calm, almost resigned. "I knew this might happen, sweetheart." "You knew?" I asked. "I know my son." Her voice was steady. "I've watched him become this person over decades. I hoped he would change, but I also prepared for the possibility that he wouldn't." My thoughts raced. Prepared how? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached toward the bedside table. "Hand me my phone, would you?" I passed it to her, confused. She scrolled through her contacts with surprising ease, found a name and pressed call. Then she put it on speaker. 3 rings. A man's voice came through, deep, calm, measured. "Margaret, how are you feeling?" "I'm dying," she said plainly. "But I'm clear-headed, and it's time." A pause. "I understand," the man replied. "When?" he asked. "This Sunday, Meredith's birthday party, at my house." Another pause. "I'll prepare the documents," he said. "Thank you, old friend." She ended the call and looked at me with a small, knowing smile. "Grandma?" I stared at her. "Who was that?" "Caleb Warren," she said gently. "He's been my attorney for 30 years. He was your grandfather's closest friend." "You have your own attorney?" She smiled faintly. "I have many things your father doesn't know about, Sky. Edward assumes he understands everything about my affairs. He's always assumed that." Her eyes softened. "It's his greatest weakness." I felt like I was standing at the edge of something enormous, looking down into depths I couldn't yet see. "What's going to happen on Sunday?" I asked. "At Mom's birthday party?" "Justice." My grandmother squeezed my hand. "Delayed, perhaps," she said softly, "but justice nonetheless." "I don't understand." "You don't need to understand everything yet." She leaned back against her pillows, suddenly looking exhausted. "I just need you to do one thing for me. Anything. Come to the party, dress nicely, and bring your patients." A faint smile crossed her lips, the ghost of one. The kind of patience she'd taught me years ago, when I was learning Chopin and wanted to throw the sheet music across the room. I almost laughed, despite everything. "That bad?" "Worse," she said gently. Then her expression softened. "But necessary. Your parents need to learn that actions have consequences. And I've spent 5 years making sure that when the lesson finally came, it would be unforgettable. 5 years. She'd been planning something for 5 years. Grandma, I whispered. What did you do? She closed her eyes, the effort finally catching up with her. I protected you, sweetheart. The way I should have protected you all along. A pause. I'm only sorry it took me so long to act. I stayed with her until she fell asleep, my mind racing. Caleb Warren. Sunday. My mother's birthday party. My grandmother's house. Something was about to change. I could feel it. I just didn't know how. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in a small law office on the outskirts of Ashton, Virginia. Caleb Warren was nothing like I'd imagined. He was in his late 60s, with silver hair and thin, gold-rimmed glasses. His movements were slow, deliberate, precise in a way that felt intentional. The office smelled of old leather and paper, shelves lining the walls from floor to ceiling, packed with legal volumes that looked like they'd been there for decades. Sky Holland, he said, standing and extending his hand. Your grandmother speaks of you often. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Mr. Warren, Caleb, please. He smiled and gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit. Your grandmother asked me to explain a few things before Sunday. I sat, my hands trembling just slightly. Your grandmother is a remarkable woman, Caleb began. Far more perceptive than her children ever gave her credit for. He folded his hands on the desk. She's been observing, and she's been planning. Planning what exactly? I asked. Caleb folded his hands neatly on the desk. Tell me something, Sky. Do you know who owns the house your parents live in? They do, I said without hesitation. Grandma gave it to them after Grandpa passed. His expression didn't change. Is that what they told you? It's what everyone says. Everyone is wrong. He opened a drawer, pulled out a thin folder, and slid it across the desk toward me. Your grandmother allowed Edward and Meredith Holland to live in that house rent-free, he said calmly. But she never transferred ownership, not legally, not once. I stared down at the document. The property deed. Margaret Holland's name, printed clearly at the top. No transfer, no amendment, nothing. They've been living in her house for 10 years, I said slowly, thinking it was theirs. Precisely. My head spun. But why would Grandma let them believe that? Because she was watching, Caleb said. He leaned forward slightly. She wanted to see whether her son would prove her fears wrong. A beat. Unfortunately, he did exactly what she expected. That night, I went back to my apartment and started searching. Years ago, my grandmother had given me a small box of her belongings, old photographs, handwritten letters, pressed flowers from her garden. I'd never gone through it carefully. It felt too intimate, like reading someone else's diary. But now, I needed answers. Near the bottom of the box, beneath a stack of faded concert programs, I found a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. My name was written across the front in my grandmother's elegant handwriting. Beneath it, 6 words. For Sky, when you need to understand. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single photograph and a copy of a legal document. The top was partially obscured, but I could see her signature at the bottom, dated 5 years ago. Clipped to the corner was a handwritten note. The house never left my hands, sweetheart. It was only borrowed. And some borrowers don't deserve the privilege. I read it once, then again, then a third time, and finally, I understood. Sunday's party was going to be held at my grandmother's house, the same house my parents treated as their own. The house where they'd hosted dinner parties and holiday gatherings. The house where they'd sold the piano that once sat in the living room, as if it belonged to them. But it didn't. It never had. My father had built his entire sense of status on a foundation that didn't exist. I thought about all the times he'd lectured me about real assets and smart investments. All the times he'd mocked my small apartment while standing in a home he didn't actually own. The irony was almost too perfect. I slipped the letter back into its envelope and placed it on my nightstand. Sunday was 3 days away. Whatever my grandmother had planned, it was going to happen in the very place my parents claimed as their territory. And they had no idea what was coming. The night before the party, my grandmother called. Her voice was weaker than before. I could hear the effort it took for her to speak. But her mind was still razor sharp. "Sky," she said softly, "are you ready for tomorrow?" "I think so." I hesitated. "Grandma, are you sure about this? It's Mom's birthday. In front of all those people." "That's exactly why it needs to be tomorrow." She took a slow breath. "Your father sold my piano in front of everyone. He announced it at that family dinner last month, like it was his decision to make. He didn't ask me. He didn't think about you. He assumed I was too weak, and you were too quiet to matter." I closed my eyes. "I remember. Then you understand why this lesson needs witnesses." Her voice softened. "I'm not doing this for revenge, sweetheart. Revenge is empty. I'm doing this because it's right, and because you deserve to be protected, especially after I'm gone." Tears burned behind my eyes. "Grandma, I should have acted sooner. I watched how they treated you for years," she said quietly, "and I kept hoping Edward would change. That was my mistake. Love made me blind for too long." "It's not your fault." "Maybe not entirely," she replied, "but I can still make it right." There was a pause. "I don't have much time left," she said. "The doctors say weeks, but I think it's less. I can feel it. So I need to know." She stopped. "Do you trust me?" "Always." "Then come tomorrow," she said. "Wear something that makes you feel strong. And no matter what happens, remember this. You are not the villain in this story. You never were." We said goodnight. I held the phone against my chest long after the call ended, staring into the quiet of my apartment. Tomorrow would change everything. I just had to be ready to let it. Sunday arrived with pale winter sunlight and that crisp, biting air that makes everything feel sharper. My grandmother's house, Willowcrest House, the home my parents had been borrowing for years, looked almost festive. A bright, happy 58th birthday banner was strung across the porch. Cars lined the driveway and spilled onto the street. I parked at the far end and sat in my car for a moment, steadying myself. I'd chosen a navy blue dress, simple, understated. The pearl earrings my grandmother had given me for my 21st birthday rested against my neck. My hair was pinned back neatly, armor for a battle I didn't fully understand yet. Inside, the house buzzed with the sound of about 30 guests, relatives I only saw at holidays, old neighbors, and a handful of my father's business associates. Laughter floated through the rooms, too loud, too practiced. I spotted Jonathan Cole near the fireplace. His son Ethan stood beside him, Lila tucked comfortably under his arm. But my eyes were pulled immediately to the living room. The corner where the grand piano had stood for 30 years was empty. Someone had placed a large potted plant there, trying to fill the space. It looked ridiculous, a leafy green apology for something that couldn't be apologized away. My mother stood near the dining table in a red designer dress, accepting compliments like a queen receiving tribute. My father hovered close by, working the room with familiar charm. And then I saw him. In the far corner, almost invisible among the crowd, sat Caleb Warren. His leather briefcase rested beside his chair. He met my gaze across the room and gave the smallest nod. I nodded back. Just then, Aunt Rosalind, my grandmother's younger sister, appeared at my side. "Sky, sweetheart," Aunt Rosalind said softly, touching my arm. "How is Margaret, really?" "Tired," I answered honestly, but still sharp. She always was. Her eyes drifted toward the empty corner of the living room. "I noticed the piano's gone. Edward said Margaret wanted to sell it." I opened my mouth to respond, but my father's voice cut cleanly through the room. "Everyone, if I could have your attention, please." He stood in the center of the living room, crystal glass raised, commanding the space like he owned it, which I now knew he didn't. "Today, we're celebrating 58 wonderful years of Meredith Holland." Applause rippled through the room. My mother beamed. And I'd also like to share some exciting family news. My stomach dropped. As many of you know, our daughter Lila has been seeing Ethan Cole, the son of my dear friend and business partner Jonathan. He gestured toward Ethan, who smiled politely. And to celebrate her bright future, my father continued, we have a special surprise. He led the entire party outside. There, in the driveway, sat a gleaming Lexus RX, silver paint catching the winter light. A red bow rested on the hood. A gift, my father announced proudly, made possible by Margaret's generosity. She sold her antique piano to invest in her granddaughter's future. Lila squealed, threw her arms around my father, and posed for photos beside the car. I stood frozen on the porch. He was doing it again, rewriting the story, making himself the hero, erasing my grandmother's wishes entirely. A woman I didn't recognize leaned toward her husband. Wasn't that piano supposed to go to the other granddaughter, the music teacher? Her husband shrugged. Plans change. Aunt Rosalind appeared beside me, her face pale. Sky, did Margaret really agree to this? Before I could answer, Lila spotted me. Sky, she called, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Come take a picture. Don't be jealous. I'm sure Grandma will leave you something too. She laughed lightly. Maybe her old sheet music. Scattered laughter followed. My hands were shaking, my vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. And then, behind me, I heard the soft, unmistakable click of a briefcase opening. People began filing back inside, but Aunt Rosalind stepped forward, blocking my father's path. Edward, she said calmly, though her hands trembled slightly, I need to ask you something. My father's smile didn't falter. Can this wait, Rosalind? He said lightly. We're in the middle of... Did you ask Margaret before you sold that piano? The question dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Nearby, conversations stalled. Voices trailed off. My mother is in hospice, my father replied smoothly. She's not in a condition to make decisions like that. We did what was best for her. I spoke with her this morning. Aunt Rosalind didn't back down. Her voice grew steadier, stronger. She's clear-headed, Edward, completely lucid. And she told me something very specific. The room leaned in. You never asked her permission, and you never even told her. More people were listening now. I saw Jonathan Cole's expression tighten. Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside Lila. My mother pushed forward, her face flushed. Rosalind, this is my birthday, she snapped. Let's not make a scene. A scene? Aunt Rosalind laughed, but there was no humor in it. Meredith, your husband sold Margaret's most precious possession without her knowledge and used the money to buy a car. If anyone's making a scene here, it isn't me. The room went silent. 30 pairs of eyes bounced between my aunt and my parents. My father's composure cracked, just slightly. This is a family matter, he said sharply. It doesn't need to be discussed in public. Actually, a calm voice said from behind us, I think public is exactly where it needs to be discussed. I turned. Caleb Warren was standing now. His briefcase was open. A folder of documents rested in his hand. He stepped forward with the quiet authority of someone who had done this many times before. Good afternoon, he said evenly. My name is Caleb Warren. I'm Margaret Holland's attorney. My father's face drained of color. The silence was suffocating. Caleb positioned himself near the empty corner of the living room where the piano used to stand. The choice felt deliberate. I apologize for interrupting the celebration, he continued, his voice carrying easily across the room. But Margaret Holland has asked me to address several urgent matters regarding her estate. He paused. Given the circumstances, she felt it was important that her family and those closely connected to them hear this directly. My father found his voice first. My wife has an attorney, he snapped. Since when? Since 30 years ago, Edward, Caleb replied politely and sharply. I also represented your father. You'd know that if you'd ever bothered to ask. Muffled gasps rippled through the room. Someone whispered, Oh my God! My mother stepped forward, trembling with anger. Margaret is dying, she said. She's not in her right mind. Whatever papers you have. Caleb raised a hand, silencing her. I visited Margaret this morning, he said calmly. Her nurse, Helen, can confirm she is fully competent and completely lucid. She personally dictated specific instructions for today's meeting. He opened the folder and removed the first document. Now, Caleb said calmly, I understand there's been some confusion about property ownership, so let me clarify. He held up a single sheet of paper. This is the deed to the house we are currently standing in. I watched my father's face drain of color. Notice the name on the deed, Caleb continued. Margaret Holland. Not Edward Holland. Not Meredith Holland. He paused, letting the words settle. This house has never been transferred. It was never gifted. Your parents have been living here rent-free for 10 years, at Margaret's generosity, nothing more. The room erupted in whispers. My father grabbed the edge of a chair, steadying himself. Lila stared at him, confusion and panic warring on her face. And Caleb wasn't finished. That, he said quietly, is just the beginning. If you're still here, you were probably holding your breath the same way I was in that moment. Before I tell you what Caleb revealed next, let me ask you something. Who do you think actually owns that house? A. My parents. Surely Grandma transferred it at some point. B. My grandmother. Because there's been a secret all along. C. Me. Because the biggest twist is still coming. Drop your answer in the comments. Then keep listening. My father's voice cracked. This is impossible. Mother said the house was ours. She promised. She promised you could live here, Caleb replied evenly, setting the deed on the dining table where everyone could see it. She never promised ownership. There's a significant legal difference, Mr. Holland. I watched the realization spread through the room like wildfire. Jonathan Cole took a small step back from my father. One of the neighbors exchanged a knowing look with her husband. For 10 years, Caleb continued, you've enjoyed this property without paying rent, utilities, or property taxes, all covered by Margaret's accounts. You treated it as your own. You even made modifications without permission. His eyes flicked briefly to the modern light fixtures my mother had installed last year. Legally, you are tenants at will, and the property owner has the right to terminate that arrangement at any time. You can't be serious, my mother snapped, her voice shrill. We've lived here for a decade. We've invested in this house. Invested without authorization, Caleb said evenly. His expression didn't change. Any improvements you've made without written consent legally belong to the property owner, Margaret Holland. Lila grabbed Ethan's arm. This is insane. Dad, tell them this is some kind of joke. My father couldn't speak. He stared at the deed like it was a death warrant. I should also mention, Caleb added almost casually, that Virginia law takes property misrepresentation quite seriously. Presenting someone else's property as your own, especially in business contexts, can carry significant legal consequences. I watched Jonathan Cole's expression shift from confusion to cold calculation. He wasn't looking at my father like a partner anymore. He was looking at him like a liability. The empire my father had built on borrowed prestige was collapsing in real time, and Caleb still had more documents in his folder. Now, he said, drawing out a second file, we come to the matter of the trust. What trust? My father whispered. 5 years ago, Caleb replied, Margaret Holland established a separate trust, independent of the will your family is familiar with. It was created specifically to protect her most valuable assets in the event of... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Financial misconduct. Financial misconduct? My mother sputtered. We're her family. Family members can still commit misconduct, Mrs. Holland, Caleb said calmly, as recent events have demonstrated. He withdrew a thick document, its pages crisp and official. Per the terms of this trust, the following assets are irrevocably assigned to a single beneficiary, he continued. The property we're standing in, Margaret's financial accounts, and all items of sentimental value, including the 1901 grand piano that was recently sold without authorization. He looked up. His gaze settled directly on me. The sole beneficiary, Caleb said, is Sky Holland. The room went completely silent. Then Lila screamed. "What? This is fraud!" My father exploded. "She was manipulated!" He pointed at me, his face twisted with rage. She... His voice cracked off mid-sentence. "Edward," Caleb's voice turned to ice. "I'd advise you to choose your next words very carefully. Everything said here today has been witnessed by more than 30 people." Aunt Rosalind stepped forward and stood beside me. Her hand found mine and squeezed, steady, grounding. "Margaret knew exactly what she was doing," Caleb continued. "She spent 5 years watching, waiting, hoping her son would prove her wrong. Instead, he sold her most treasured possession to buy a car for the granddaughter who rarely visits her." He paused. "Actions have consequences, Mr. Holland. This," he gestured to the room, the documents, the stunned faces, "is yours." My mother was crying now. Lila looked like she might be sick. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Caleb let the chaos settle before he went on. "Regarding the piano sale," he said, pulling out another document, "because the 1901 grand piano was part of the Holland family trust, and Sky Holland is the designated beneficiary, the sale, conducted without the trustees' consent, constitutes unauthorized disposal of trust assets." "What does that mean?" Lila asked, her voice suddenly small. "It means," Caleb replied evenly, "that $65,000 must be returned to the trust within 120 days. His gaze swept across my parents and my sister. "Failure to comply will result in civil litigation for misappropriation of trust property. Given the paper trail, I assure you the outcome would not be favorable for your family." My father laughed, a hollow, desperate sound. "We don't have $65,000 just sitting around. The money went to the car." "Then I suggest you find a way to liquidate that asset," Caleb said, nodding toward the window where the Lexus RX still sat in the driveway, the red bow bright against the windshield. "The dealer may accept a return, though you'll likely take a significant loss." Lila burst into tears. "My car? You're taking my car?" "I'm not taking anything, Miss Holland," Caleb replied calmly. "I'm simply explaining the legal consequences of your family's choices." And for the first time, the cost of those choices was no longer abstract. It was parked outside, shiny, silent, and about to disappear. I watched Lila turn to Ethan for support, but he had already stepped away from her, his expression carefully neutral. His father leaned in, whispering something low in his ear. Neither of them looked sympathetic. Caleb continued, his tone steady. "Margaret has also asked me to inform you that your living arrangement in this house will be formally restructured. You may remain here temporarily, but a proper lease agreement will be required." "A lease?" My mother's voice barely carried. "In the house we've lived in for 10 years?" "In the house," Caleb corrected gently, "that you never owned." The room went deathly quiet. Every eye turned to me. My father turned slowly, his face twisted with betrayal and fury. "You did this," he said. "You poisoned her against us." I didn't step back. "No, Dad, I didn't do anything." My voice was steadier than I expected. "Grandma made these decisions 5 years ago, long before I knew about them. I only found out this week." "Liar," my mother snapped, venom shaking her voice. "You've always been jealous of Lila, of our family's success. This is your revenge." Revenge? Something cold and solid crystallized inside me. I didn't sell Grandma's piano without asking her. I didn't spend that money on a car for myself. I didn't lie to everyone about what happened. I stepped forward, meeting my mother's eyes. I'm not the one who said, "At least she's useful for something," when I agreed to visit Grandma every day. I'm not the one who hung up on me when I asked questions. And I'm not the one who threatened me, telling me I'd be responsible for killing Grandma if I told her the truth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Aunt Rosalind's hand tightened around mine. "I spent 27 years being invisible in this family," I continued, my voice unwavering. "I accepted it because I thought that's what love required, making yourself smaller so others could feel comfortable." I looked at my father, at my mother, at Lila, still crying over her doomed car. But Grandma taught me something different, I said quietly. She taught me that loving yourself means standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. I took a slow breath. So here's what I want you to understand, I said. I'm not apologizing anymore. I'm not staying silent anymore, and I'm done pretending everything is fine when it isn't. The room went completely still. Gradually, the guests began to disperse, slowly, awkwardly, murmured goodbyes, eyes carefully avoiding mine. When the last of them drifted away, Caleb stepped closer and gently pulled me aside. "Sky," he said quietly, "we need to discuss next steps." I nodded, the moment still feeling unreal, like I was watching myself from a distance. "Legally, you have several options," he continued, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You could demand immediate eviction. Given the circumstances, your grandmother would support whatever decision you make." I looked across the room. My father had collapsed into a chair, his head buried in his hands. My mother stood frozen near the window, mascara streaked down her face. Lila was gone, probably outside, mourning the car she thought she'd secured her future with. They looked broken, and part of me, a small, wounded part, wanted to twist the knife, to make them feel every ounce of the pain they'd caused me over 27 years. But that wasn't who I wanted to be. "I don't want to throw them out," I said slowly. "Not immediately." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Are you certain?" "Yes." I took another breath. "Here's what I want. The $65,000 gets returned within 120 days, not 30. I'll give them time to sell the car and figure things out. They can stay in the house under a formal lease agreement with minimal rent." I swallowed hard. "And after my grandmother passes, they'll have 9 months to find somewhere else to live." Caleb studied me carefully. "That's remarkably generous, given everything." "Maybe," I said, meeting his gaze. "But I'm not doing this to punish them. I'm doing it because it's right, and because I refuse to become the kind of person they are." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded, a trace of respect crossing his face. "Your grandmother said you'd respond this way," he said softly. "She's very proud of you." "I know," I whispered. My voice cracked. "I know she is." The agreement was drafted right there on the dining room table, signed, witnessed by Aunt Rosalind and 2 of the remaining guests. My father signed without looking at me. My mother's hand shook so badly she could barely hold the pen. Neither of them said a word. By the time the final signature was in place, the house had emptied. Jonathan Cole and Ethan had left without saying goodbye. I later learned Ethan drove away while Lila was still outside crying. The birthday cake sat untouched on the table. The banner sagged sadly across the porch. Aunt Rosalind hugged me tightly before she left. "You did the right thing, sweetheart. Margaret would be so proud." "She is proud," I said softly. "I talked to her this morning." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A video call, Silverline Hospice. I answered and walked to the empty corner of the living room where the piano used to stand. My grandmother's face filled the screen, pale but peaceful. Nurse Helen stood behind her, smiling gently. "My brave girl," Grandma said. Her voice was weak but warm. "How do you feel?" "Terrified," I admitted, "and relieved, and sad, all at once." She smiled faintly. "That's how courage feels, sweetheart. It's never comfortable." "I didn't throw them out," I said. "I gave them time." "I know," she replied softly. "Caleb texted me." Her eyes glistened. "You're a better person than they deserve, Sky. That's why I chose you." I pressed my hand to the screen, wishing I could hold hers instead. "Thank you, Grandma. For everything. For protecting me." "Don't thank me," she said gently. "Just live well, play music, be happy." "That's how you thank me." "I will." "I know you will," she whispered. "I know you will." Her eyes closed. I know some of you are probably thinking, so that's it? Did her parents ever change? The honest answer is complicated. Not every story has a perfect ending, but every story has a lesson. Before I tell you what happened in the months that followed, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family? How hard was it? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. The first week after the party was chaos. News travels fast in tight social circles. What happened at Meredith Holland's birthday didn't stay private for long. Within days, my father's business world began to quietly close its doors. Meetings were postponed, calls went unanswered. People who'd once been eager to associate suddenly became unavailable. Jonathan Cole formally withdrew from the joint venture they'd been planning. When my father demanded an explanation, the response was brief and cold. I can't do business with someone I can't trust. If you'd deceive your own mother, Edward, what would you do to a partner? The deal had been worth over $215,000. Gone. Just like that. Lila had to return the Lexus RX. The dealership offered her just over $50,000, nearly $15,000 less than what my parents had paid. She screamed at the salesman for 20 minutes before finally signing the paperwork, mascara streaked down her face. Ethan broke up with her 3 days later. My family thinks it's best if we take some time apart, the text read. Translation: they wanted nothing to do with the Holland family drama. My sister, the golden child, the one who always landed on her feet, found herself suddenly ordinary. No car, no wealthy boyfriend, no special status. She borrowed my mother's old Honda to drive to job interviews. I didn't gloat. I didn't reach out. I went back to my life, teaching piano to my students, visiting Grandma every evening. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a quiet satisfaction in watching the facades crumble. My father had spent years measuring success in appearances, the house, the car, the right connections. Now he was learning the truth. None of it had ever really been his. The foundation he'd built his identity on was borrowed, and borrowed things always have to be returned. 3 weeks after the party, my phone rang at 6 a.m. It was Silverline Hospice. You should come now, Nurse Helen said gently. She's asking for you. I drove faster than I should have, my heart pounding the entire way. Grandma's room was quiet when I arrived. Morning light filtered through the curtains, casting soft golden shadows across her bed. Her breathing was shallow, her skin paper-thin, but her eyes were open, and when she saw me, she smiled. "My Sky," she whispered. "Come, sit with me." I took her hand. It felt impossibly fragile, like holding a bird. "I have something to tell you," she said slowly. "Something I should have said years ago." "What is it, Grandma?" "I'm sorry." I blinked. "Sorry for what?" "For not acting sooner." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I watched how they treated you, year after year. I kept hoping Edward would change, that Meredith would finally see your value. I made excuses because I didn't want to believe my own son could be that person." Her voice faltered. "It's not your fault," I said, my own tears falling now. "Maybe not entirely," she whispered, "but I could have done more. I could have protected you earlier, instead of waiting until I was dying." She squeezed my hand weakly. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. You deserved better." "You gave me everything that mattered," I said fiercely. "Music, love, the knowledge that I was worth something. That's more than they ever gave me." And she smiled, and for a moment she looked like the grandmother I remembered from my childhood, strong, radiant, fully alive. "I'm so proud of you, Sky," she said softly. "You have a good heart, and you finally learned how to guard it. You taught me that. Then I did something right." Her eyes fluttered closed. "I'm tired now, sweetheart," she murmured. "Stay with me." Margaret Holland passed away that evening, peacefully, with my hand in hers. The funeral was held 5 days later at the small church she'd attended for nearly 50 years. Per her wishes, it was simple. No extravagant flowers, no grand displays, just music, memories, and the people who truly loved her. I played the piano during the service, not the grand piano that was gone, but a modest upright the church had owned for decades. I played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the first piece Grandma ever taught me. The church was half full. Aunt Rosalind sat in the front row, tissues clenched in her hands. Friends from Grandma's performing days filled several pews. White-haired women who remembered when Margaret Holland had been a name that meant something in the classical music world. My parents sat in the back. They didn't approach me before the service. Not during, not after. My mother wore dark sunglasses that hid her eyes. My father stared straight ahead, like a man attending his own sentencing. Lila wasn't there at all. Too emotionally fragile, my mother told someone who asked. I delivered the eulogy. I spoke about Grandma's music, her wisdom, her quiet strength. I talked about how she taught me that love wasn't about grand gestures. It was about showing up, day after day, and choosing to truly see someone for who they were. I didn't mention the drama. The funeral wasn't the place. After the service, I saw my father start toward me. He hesitated, took a step, then stopped when my mother grabbed his arm and pulled him away. He never crossed the room. Maybe he wanted to apologize. Maybe he didn't. I'll never know. But I'd already made peace with the fact that some apologies never come, and some aren't needed anymore. 6 months later, I moved into Willowcrest House. At first, it felt strange, walking through rooms filled with her presence, sleeping in the guest bedroom I'd known since childhood. But slowly, the house softened around me. It began to feel like home. I used part of the returned money to buy a new piano. Not a Steinway. Those cost far more than $65,000, but a beautiful Yamaha Grand, one that fit perfectly into the corner where Grandma's piano had once stood. Different, but meaningful in its own way. A new beginning. I started teaching private lessons on weekends. My first student was Aunt Rosalind's granddaughter, Sophie. 8 years old, bright-eyed, with the same impatient energy I'd had at her age. When she played her first complete scale, I cried. My parents moved out 9 months after Grandma's passing. They didn't wait until the last day. They said they couldn't live somewhere filled with too many painful memories. I think they just couldn't stand the reminder of what they'd lost. They bought a small condo across town. My father's business struggled, shrinking to nearly half its former size. My mother joined a new social circle, one where people didn't know the family's history. We didn't speak, not out of anger exactly, just distance. Some gaps are too wide to bridge. But I wasn't bitter. Bitterness is exhausting, and I had a life to build. In the evenings, I sat at the piano and played until the stars came out, letting the music fill the house again, not as an echo of the past, but as proof that something beautiful had survived. Sometimes it was Chopin, sometimes Bach, sometimes just improvised melodies, music that wandered, went nowhere and everywhere all at once. In those moments, my grandmother's presence felt close, in the faint scent of lavender from the garden she'd planted, in the creak of the old floorboards beneath my feet, in the way the evening light spilled through the windows at sunset. She was gone, and yet she was everywhere. And for the first time in my life, I was free. 8 months after the funeral, my phone rang. Lila. I stared at the screen through 3 full rings before answering. Sky. Her voice sounded different, smaller, less certain. Lila. Silence stretched between us. 27 years of sisterhood reduced to awkward pauses. I'm not calling to ask for anything, she said finally. I wanted to say something. Okay. I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, about how I acted. She took a shaky breath. I was so angry at first. At you, at Grandma, at everyone. I thought you'd stolen something from me. Another pause. And now? Her voice softened. Now I'm working at a marketing firm, entry level. I take the bus because I can't afford a car, and I've started going to therapy. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. My therapist says I have a lot to unpack about Mom and Dad, she continued. About how I was raised, about why I thought I deserved everything without earning it. She gave a short, hollow laugh. Turns out being the favorite isn't actually a gift, it's a trap. I'm glad you're working through it, I said quietly. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said quickly, her voice cracking. I don't deserve that. I just wanted you to know. I understand now. Why you did what you did. Why Grandma did what she did. Grandma loved you too, Lila, I said gently. She just couldn't reward behavior that hurt other people. I know, she whispered, a soft sniffle. I know that now. We sat in silence for a moment. If you ever want to talk, I said slowly, I'm willing to listen, but trust takes time to rebuild. I understand, she replied. And for the first time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the possibility of one. We hung up without saying goodbye, not out of coldness, but because neither of us knew how. Some doors, once closed, don't swing open again. They open slowly. But they can open. It's spring now, a full year since Grandma entered hospice. Tonight, I sit at my piano as the sun sinks behind the garden at Willow Crest House. The windows are open. A warm breeze drifts in, carrying the scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass. I play Grandma's favorite nocturne, the one she performed at her final concert 20 years ago. The notes move through the empty house, filling the silence with something gentler. I think about everything that brought me here, the betrayal, the truth laid bare, the boundaries I never believed I'd be strong enough to set. I think about Grandma, her strength, her patience, her quiet determination to protect me, even when I didn't know I needed protecting. I think about my parents, in their small condo across town, rebuilding a life that will never quite match the one they imagined. About Lila riding the bus, learning, maybe for the first time, what it means to earn something. I don't hate them. Hate takes too much energy. But I don't need them anymore either. And that's a kind of freedom I never expected to find. The nocturne ends. The final notes linger in the air, then fade into the evening quiet. I look at Grandma's photograph resting on the piano. Her at 60, radiant, fingers poised above the keys of the old Steinway. I'm doing okay, Grandma, I whisper. I'm more than okay. Somewhere, I like to think she hears me. I close the piano lid, stand, and walk to the window. Stars are just beginning to appear, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. I don't have the original piano. I don't have the family I thought I had. But I have something better. I have myself. I have boundaries. I have a life built on truth instead of silence. And that is the real inheritance my grandmother left me. That's my story. Thank you for staying until the end. If this resonated with you, if you've ever had to stand up for yourself in a family that made you feel invisible, please know this. You're not alone. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's how you honor your own worth. If this story meant something to you, hit like. Subscribe for more stories like this, and check the description for others I think you'll love. I'll see you in the next video.